folks. Welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 2919 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show on Power Talk 1210. We are extraterrestrial radio now, and we are in fine fashion today. This morning, joined by one of the most creative artists in the world, international star, a guy who's continued to try to check his ego along the way, but he's played with so many luminaries and he's been at the forefront of so much progressive music. It's hard to stay humble, but he does. Jean-Luc Ponty, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Hello, thank you.
Thank you, sir. It's an honor to have you here.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Yes. Jean-Luc, can you talk the first time that you saw John Coltrane live and how that experience changed you fundamentally?
He was, in fact, the opening act for Dizzy Gillespie in a theater in Paris. And I was more familiar with Dizzy Gillespie, to be honest. And John Coltrane had just started his own band. He had left Miles Davis. I think it was his second time in Paris. I had missed the first. But so the music, it was a shock. It was a musical shock. One of my early big musical shocks. I could not understand everything they played, especially rhythmically with the drummer, the kind of beats and so I almost had a headache, to tell you the truth, coming out of the theater after his performance. But then it stayed with me for the next day or even 2 days. Like I couldn't stop thinking about this music, and so I started listening to his albums and got into his music then.
Can you talk about the burning quality? Was it just the burning nature of the music, or the fact that there were was he in his modal period? I should have asked you what year it was.
I wish I would remember exactly, but it must, let's see. I was getting into jazz, so it must have been 1960, around 62,
right, Right.
Within a couple of years. It could be 60 or 60. It would not be later than 1962 anyway.
Was he just blowing? Was he blowing through?
It was the energy. The energy was so new. It was a step above in terms of intensity. More than any other band before in jazz, and rock was barely starting at the time, so we were not used to that kind of energy. But it was also how far it was going in the exploration of harmonies, his improvisations,
Absolutely.
And Alvin Jones on drums also. They were all very creative in the band. Mike Tyler coming up with new ways of playing chord changes behind John. So it was really a musical revolution. So, it took me a little time to understand what they were doing, but thanks to my musical education, I had heard complex music and I was able to understand that. That's why I was even more impressed, is that in jazz nobody had gone that far exploring improvisation.
It's such an honor to connect with you, Mr. Ponty, but as a non-musician, can you talk about, because of your knowledge, you eventually figured out what they were doing? Can you talk to the layperson about what they were doing? Because to me, it's music again, you're with Stanley Clarke and Return to Forever. You've been burning for like 50 years, but younger cats, music is really made for pacification now. And my whole show is about how to burn. But I'm not a musician, so I just wanted you to talk about when you really uncovered, after your headaches went away, what they were doing.
Well, I don't know how to explain it, especially to someone who would be a non-musician. It's always so difficult to describe music, and especially that it will correspond to what I heard in the mind of someone who hears me talk about it. So it's very difficult, but I'll try. Until then, you can follow. A jazz musician would improvise variations on a melody. So that's what usually happens, especially in the traditional jazz of the 50s, 60s. Most of the themes were taken off Broadway musicals, so that they were easy songs to follow in terms of melody. Once the melody is played, musicians go back to the top of the song and start improvising. Instead of playing the melody as written, you create variations, new melodies, and so up to then, musicians would do it fairly slowly enough so that you could follow every note they played, and therefore it was not such a big intellectual effort to understand how the notes they played related to the song. But with Coltrane, it was like a storm. It was so fast, so many notes, and also in a complex way. It was like a storm, like a swirl going around the note. Instead of playing the note, there would be 100 notes around it, but all related.
Right.
I guess it's a bit like in science. The more you look into the smallest things, like the atom and etc., and you can discover even further that it's endless. So that was a bit the impression I had. And,
well, you did. You described it, Jean-Luc. You described it very, very well. Because I'm just curious about the cats that you like when you came out of that. Obviously, humbled to a degree, but you wanted to learn what they were doing, and you were woodshedding. And I noticed. You connected with Wolfgang Downer, and some of these guys that were. Would you say that? Could you talk about the first band that you got with, where you were channeling that thesaurus of scales, those endless harmonies, where you were really basically, and then adding your own twist to it in Europe?
Yeah, well, I did not want to copy Coltrane. I didn't want to follow exactly the same way, but it was a great example to try to do my own way, to explore harmonies indeed, to go around the notes and see, instead of playing what was very evident, to look further, like through a microscope, and then you find other notes to play around that note, like I explained earlier. But so I did not do it in the same type of speed and intensity, and also the instrument is different with the violin. It's easier on a saxophone because your fingers stay at the same place on the keys of the instrument. So you can really move very fast. On a violin, you have the bow, you have to change strings, and then your hand goes back, up and down on the neck of the instrument. So it's different. But what I took from him, though, from Coltrane, was the sound. Just long notes, playing a ballad, a slow melody, for instance. Suddenly, it was not. It was kind of a very straight sound, not the passionate vibrato, or it was kind of a hard urban sound, but very intense. The emotion was in the density of the sound, like a long note. In fact, I learned later that Coltrane had also been inspired by Indian music, East Indian music.
Absolutely.
Where I also discovered Indian music at the same time, about later though, a bit later. But same thing in North Indian music, classical Indian music. I discovered a violinist, and he was playing very straight notes, very straight sound, no vibrato. And the expression, it makes your mind travel. It's a different effect on the mind that a romantic European melody, for instance. Very different effect. It's good for meditation as well, because what it does is you don't really, you stop paying attention to every note you hear, and your mind travels. You see images, just like meditation. So that's what I reproduce on the violin. That was how I started to develop my sound, was starting from that.
It's exactly, you're leading right into my, you're flowing with me perfectly. We're joined here by Jean-Luc Ponty on the Jake Feinberg Show. And, there were, correct me if I'm wrong, but there were no jazz schools in France at the time. The violin was considered a classical instrument. I just wanted you to talk to the audience, especially younger cats out there who might be playing antiquated instruments or instruments that might fit into a different musical genre, about a time when somebody, or it could have been a consecutive amount of times where you were going into these avant-garde jazz blues settings, and people were basically saying, "What are you doing? Like, you don't belong here. This is not, that instrument's not supposed to be played here." And they kept in your face, and then obviously you'd play it back at them. But can you talk about overcoming that adversity, if it happened, and how it made you stronger?
Did I understand you correctly?
People that were giving you people that were giving
there was kind of a prejudice against the violin, and when I was coming with my instrument, that I was
not so much
doubting that I was. Should be even allowed to go on stage play with these avant-garde musicians? Is that it?
Yeah, basically not prejudice against the violin, but the idea of being bold enough not just to put it into a jazz blues context, but also playing it as prolifically as you did. Did you take flack for that early on, and if so, how did you push back against it?
Well, yes, it's true that when I started with clarinet and saxophone, and it was for fun, and it was swing music. We were playing with a band in a university for dance parties once a month. But then that's how I discovered the whole world, the whole jazz world, because this was the late 50s, very early 59, 1960, and I discovered very quickly that besides this swing jazz, there was already Miles Davis. We were even after bebop. It was post-bop already, and I discovered all the modern jazz musicians. And so I was, that's what appealed to me a lot more. In fact, I took jazz a lot more seriously when I discovered all this style of music, which was more modern and was adopting the discoveries of European classical music, Stravinsky and all the great inventors of melodies and harmonies. Jazz musicians had experienced that and incorporate that element in their music. But when modern music, when bebop, post-bop happened, then the violin was considered as not having its place anymore, because most violinists would be using the instrument in a very romantic, sweet, with a sweet sound, with a very passionate vibrato, like in gypsy music, for instance, or classical music, but romantic. And that didn't fit bebop or post-bop at all. So that's why when I was unknown yet. I was the young guy coming with my fiddle in a jazz club asking if they would let me jam with them.
Right.
They would look at me, why, violinist? I don't know. Are you playing tango or what? And then after they heard me, they, okay, he got it. He's got it. He understood. He's one of us. So that's how I was admitted in the circles of modern jazz musicians. And as long as I played bebop or post-bop, then the jazz audience would follow me. They would understand. But you know, I had a very open mind, and I was very curious, and I was hearing all this free jazz, avant-garde music, and I was hungry to try, to experiment, try everything that was existing musically at the time. Once I got into avant-garde and free jazz, there were only, you know, the number of people following me was dwindling down to just a few when I played in a club. It was, in fact, after a couple of years of doing that, I had no gigs anymore. And
wow.
I even came to a point where I could not make a living with the jazz, and I had to consider doing something else. And that's when Frank Zappa called me to tour with him, and it was kind of destiny that took me out of trouble, and you know, you probably know the rest. But that's how it happened. So I definitely did not have in mind to play music just to be successful or please the audience. I wanted to fulfill my need to experiment, first of all.
Yeah, you know, I just turned 38 on Monday, so I am trying to fill in the blanks for my generation and future generations. And, I mean, were there cats, beboppers, that took note of you? I mean, I know Zappa was very, very close with a lot of the West Coast hard bop guys like Harold Land. He knew a lot of cats, that jazzers. I mean, how did he get word about you? Did those cats come back from Europe and from France and say, you got to check this guy Ponty out?
No, what happened is it all started thanks to John Lewis, who was the pianist composer, co-founder of the Modern Jazz Quartet.
Sure.
He was a very open-minded person, and was also very curious. And when he was touring in the world, he would go out and check local musicians, and that's how he discovered me in Paris. While he was on tour, playing in a club, he heard me, and he invited me to play at the Monterey Jazz Festival in 1967 because he was the musical director of that festival then. And so I performed for the first time in the States in California, at the Monterey Festival, and there was the record producer there, Richard Bock,
Sure.
who had founded Pacific Jazz and World Pacific. Strangely, he was also a pioneer in his as a producer, you know, ahead of his time, because he created a label about world music, and the term of world music appeared only 20 years later. But he was also he went to India. He discovered. I mean, first of all, he was a big jazz fan and had created this jazz label on the West Coast, recording the best jazz musicians from Los Angeles. But he was also into Indian music. He had gone to India, and he's the one who discovered Ravi Shankar and produced the first recordings of him and made him known to us in the Western world. And so he signed me to his label. That's what brought me back to Los Angeles the year after the first appearance in California. And he got me some engagements in jazz clubs in Los Angeles and jazz festivals. and I needed a band, so I hooked up with George Duke, a pianist then, and that's how it all started. And he was the one who's, I don't know, he had a vision of me expanding from the jazz world into the rock world. And I was reluctant at first, I was I thought it was weird, and but he got the idea of hooking me up with Zappa. So he was the guy who,
Yeah, just to be clear though, John.
Events like that. Thanks to John Lewis.
Yeah.
I was in California. This guy heard me, hooked me up with Zappa, and on, and it was destiny and encounters, and so that's how I connected with musicians on the West Coast first. Then I stopped in New York and met McLaughlin and Tony Williams.
Yeah, we're not going to rush ahead.
So that's when I started to have connection with American jazz musicians and rock musicians.
We have a game on this program called Name That Voice. This is an interview I did almost 4 years ago. Let's take a listen to this, and then we'll come back and talk about it, okay?
All right.
When I found out Jean-Luc was coming to the States to make a record, I just went nuts. I sent tapes. There was no internet or anything, so I mailed this real tape down. And I guess Jean-Luc heard it and said, "Okay, let's give it a shot."
Let's give it a shot.
We did, and that was it. And so we did a record. I think it was called Electric Connection. And I just basically played piano on it, and we did a record at Dante's, a trio record, which has since come out, which was a little more, for its time, was pretty daring. Electric violin and a trio, which was my trio with John Hurt, and I believe Al Chickie played on that particular Dante's record. But then the next record that we made at the Rock Club was Dick Burke. Now, what happened is we did this record with Frank Zappa, and called King Kong, and Jean said the only way I want to do this record with this rock guy is if I bring my piano player, and so I said, Jean-Luc asked me, he said, you think I should do this? I said, yeah, man, let's do it. What do we got to lose? Because the music we heard sounded pretty interesting. And so we went in the studio, made the record. Frank kind of liked the way I played, and we maybe several weeks later, or a month, whatever it was, played this club called The Experience, which was right on Sunset Strip. And I told Dick Bock, who was the guy that ran World Pacific Jazz Records, I said, okay, the only way I'll do this is if he got a piano. He said, don't worry, I'll have a piano down there for you. He just felt that with the kind of jazz we were playing, that we could get over to, we could enlarge our audience by getting over to a younger crowd, to a rock crowd. He said, look, all you got to do is play the same music you're playing, just put a rock beat under it every now and then.
Put a rock beat under it. Who is that, Jean-Luc?
Oh man, this is very moving. I'm very moved to hear George Duke's voice, man.
Rest in peace.
I miss him.
Yes.
I miss him, but yeah, he's right. That's how it all started.
Yeah, talk about. Rest in peace. The man left us. He left this earth too soon. But he was fanatical about your music before I think he even met you. That's what I was picking up on. Talk about that he was sending you tapes. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, because what happened is very strangely, there was a jazz label from Germany whose boss, the founder of that label, it was called MPS.
Sure.
It was a P like in Peter, MPS.
Oh, yeah.
And the owner and founder of that label was, in fact, he owned a big factory of electronics. I don't know what they were doing, stereo equipment, I forgot what. So, but he loved playing jazz piano, and he created that jazz label for fun, and recorded very few people, but Oscar Peterson, who was his idol as a pianist, and he recorded me as well. And for his business, he had a representative in San Francisco, to sell his German electronic equipment in America. But at the same time, he was asking him, this representative German guy who he had in San Francisco, to look around, go to jazz clubs, and if he heard any good musicians, to maybe, make an album or fly them to Germany to make an album. And that's how this guy discovered George Duke in a club in San Francisco. And because I had recorded on that German label as well in Europe, George Duke, through this guy, got a copy of an album I had just recorded. So that's how George Duke discovered my playing. I didn't even know of him yet. But when I arrived in Los Angeles to record for Pacific Jazz, or actually I was signed to World Pacific, anyway, Richard Bock told me I just got this tape, the demo tape from a young pianist from San Francisco who is looking for a contract, and he heard you were coming and he's a fan of your music. So I listened to the demo, and when I heard George Duke playing, I said, this is exactly the kind of pianist I need. He sounded modern. There was some Herbie Hancock influence at the time, and I said, perfect. So that's how we hooked up.
It's beautiful because then I guess you were skeptical about going to King Kong or the album with Zappa, but you guys went down there. And then I guess what I really wanted to talk to you about is, that night at the Experience, I know Cannonball Adderley was there. Zappa was in the audience that night. I just picked up a double reissue on Blue Note of some of that, all these different sessions. I mean, you were playing with the Crusaders. You were being thrown into all different types of musical settings. But, Jean-Luc, I wanted to ask you, to me, there's a crisis in the language of real improvisational music today, mainly because there are not enough live venues for musicians to play at consistently, not just playing a three-hour gig at a steakhouse, but I'm talking about 3 weeks at a time or 4 nights at a time, where you can really develop your own individual sound. And I wanted to get your thoughts on the if you believe that the language of music has been stifled because there's just, I know France is different, okay? I know that you can have a jazz festival and somehow 1,500 people will show up on a hill. I know the passion is there in Europe. I'm just talking about the States. I mean, there are no venues anymore. And I just wanted to get your thought, because you're just a perfect example of somebody who was bubbling with their own individual sound. My feeling is you got comfortable on the bandstand, and that's how you developed it. And I just want to know if that was accurate or not.
Yeah, well, exactly. But it's changed in France as well. Yes, jazz has developed to a larger audience than even in my time when I started here. In terms, there are so many jazz festivals all over the world, and especially France, but all over Europe. And when I started, there was only one big festival, but there were many clubs in Paris. There were several clubs. And you're absolutely right that to have the chance to be hired for a week, I was hired for a month at the time. There was the Blue Note, which was not related to the Blue Note, the chain of Blue Notes existing today. It's just an American who was in Paris he just had taken that name to big jazz club, and he hired me. It was unlimited. He said you can play as long. I stayed 2-3 months maybe there, playing every night. So you're absolutely right that there were no jazz schools, not even in America at the time. But the best school was just to be able to play every night. It's not like that anymore because there are less clubs and a lot more musicians. The young generation of musicians, they have a very hard time being hired in a club, and there is none anymore who is hired to play for a whole week or several weeks, even less. It's just one night once in a while. but there are schools. So, in fact, when you hear the level of musicianship, I mean, the technique they have and the knowledge they have, the young generation, is amazing. So,
well, I'm going to counter you for a minute. All right, so that's right. They have technical chops. My generation, younger generations, monster chops, learning within the four walls of academia. So, please, Jean-Luc, tell me how you learned. Give me an example, one time in your memory that you can remember, how you learned to feel the music. I mean, we've had digital beats crammed into the ears of youngsters for two decades now. They would not even recognize a Kenny Clark drum beat. It's so automated. It's so formulaic. How did you learn to feel the music?
Well, that you don't learn. It's the way you are as a human being. Either you're sensitive and I guess music, I find out after so many years, is very metaphysical. And either you're receptive, like you're a medium for capturing these audio waves that trigger feelings, indeed. And from the very beginning, I always felt and perceived music as not something intellectual, although you have to learn, of course, to get your way with chord changes. But once, I mean, the goal is to learn and master it well enough so that you forget about it and just let go and let inspiration take over.
Mm.
And so when I discovered jazz and became passionate for it, as soon as I would wake up and take breakfast, I would put an album on the turntable and start listening. And I would listen the whole, during the day many times, and take my violin and play along with albums at home. And then at night go to clubs and play with other musicians. But I guess that
there
are a lot of excellent musicians, but who are good technically. But there are fewer who are true artists in the sense that they can channel emotions, and that's what you feel when they play. That's the next step. You're above the pack if you can do that. To me, that's the real goal,
I want you to go, okay, but this is so important. I mean, you have to realize something. I mean, when I got hip to you, Electric Connection, even the stuff Sunday Walk, I mean, just the beautiful melodies coming, I mean, that stuff, if you're in touch, I was born in 78, so I was not completely immersed in digital music. I can feel it. I can hear it. But can you go back to this metaphysical component? Part of my show is very much dealing in the metaphysical. When I watch those clips of with you and Mahavishnu, with Narda Michael Walden and McLaughlin, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I can't believe your eyeballs didn't roll into the back of your head. But it's this cosmic transcendence. And I don't, like I said, with this conformity and this strain towards serious conformity, paranoia, fear that is pervading our society, I guess, do you believe that, not necessarily in France, but are you worried at all that people of all different ethnicities are losing the understanding of where their roots are musically? Do they go back far enough? If a drummer, for instance, someone says play a shuffle, they might play a shuffle from a late 70s, early 80s rock band. They're not playing a shuffle from from a blues cat out of Chicago on Chess Records in the 40s and 50s, or they're not going back to Django Reinhardt for the guitar, or they're not going back to Dizzy. I mean, are you concerned that younger generations don't know where they come from, and are you worried that if we lose our culture, that, that's how fascism took over originally.
Yeah. Well, that's well, you're opening kind of
sociology.
A big subject here, and that can lead us for hours of discussion. But fascism, not necessarily, everybody thinks immediately of Nazis, how it happened in Germany. Yes, let's not forget that. But it happens. It can happen again under different forms. And at least the Nazi, it became obvious pretty quickly that it was absolutely terrible and nuts. But there are ways nowadays that are a lot more subtle. It's done a lot in a much smarter ways to manipulate the minds of people around the planet. And yes, it's very sad when I can get pretty depressed when I think about the amplitude of it. And so far, they did not succeed. But what is important is to be able to remain to remain as an individual. But the thing is, I come from a generation which has my mind has not been manipulated through electronics and all the means that become available and have an effect on the minds of young children, for instance.
Right.
So I wonder, I really wonder where mankind, the human world is going towards. What scares me the most is transhumanism. But at the same time, I believe that there will always be people who keep their conscience and their individual will and their spirituality. It's a matter of being connected or not, as you mentioned before, with the cosmic world. Indeed, metaphysical, I was in a studio last year, or 2 years ago. Was it last year? 2014, I guess. Recording a trio with Stanley Clarke and Barry Lagran, French gypsy guitarist, who's amazing. And we have practically never played with this guitarist. We just did one show, but we spent 4 days in the studio, and we played stuff like me and the guitarist. After hearing it, I was wondering, I said, where did I find this idea? I never played anything like that. Our mind must have connected. We played the same harmony, hit the same rhythm at the same time. That's what happened with George Duke, by the way, when the very first night we played in a jazz club, no rehearsal. We just met, hey, my name is, pleased to meet you. Let's play the blues. And that was it. And as soon as we started playing, he was sensing where I was going musically. He was right there with me all the time, like reading my mind musically. So I believe in that, and I believe in the positive and the resistance to people who want to manipulate minds of people.
Yeah, well, I mean, do you feel...
But
yeah.
It's true that after a few generations, I see my grandkids, how much they are influenced by what they see on television and all, and the tablets and playing with phones and this and that. It's going to form their mind in a different way, perhaps.
Well, I also wanted to get your take on, I was transcribing that interview with George Duke, which I can send you. You're going to really love it a lot. He just talked about things.
Yeah, I would love it.
I will. You just give me your email. I'll send it to you. But the thing is, he said that basically, let me get the exact quote here. He said that things move so fast now with technology. I mean, he said, now with things happening so fast and communication between San Francisco and Tokyo happening instantaneously, I'm not sure if you're allowed to think about things and make sure you know what you're doing yet. You have a lot of people being reactive as opposed to really thinking about what you are doing. That, to me, that was 4 years ago he said that. But if things are moving so fast where you don't even have a chance, if you're not allowed to think of what you're doing, if it's the right thing to do, nothing's going to germinate. I mean, part of the magic of you coming to the States, that stuff didn't happen overnight. It germinated for a long time. Now with instantaneous communication technology, you have one idea, you go to a next one. There's no time for the seed to germinate. Listen, I have 2 kids too. I mean, I try to regulate, modulate their technology time. I'm not concerned about them. Obviously, I'm their father. They have very open minds, their characters. But just by and large, it seems to me that if you're not allowed to think, if you don't have enough time to think about what you're doing, if it's the right thing to do, you're leading towards insanity at that point.
Yes. I don't hear you that well. The volume is very low.
I'll turn.
So I didn't really hear the very last words you just said.
I just said that if you are not allowed, if society, if the time is so, if the pressure of time and money is so intense, and you do not have the time to think of that what you're doing is the right thing to do, then you're going to make as a society, a lot of very bad judgments, and ultimately it leads towards insanity. That's what worries me about it, is that as convenient as it is for us to be able to have all the digital connections and the gizmos, the faster we go and the less time we give for people to give real articulate thought, to me it's a dangerous curve. And we don't need to spend time on this per se. I wanted to Jean-Luc, I wanted to ask you, I've talked to a lot of cats. I've talked to 500 cats, Stanley Clark twice, and tons of cats. And a lot of them were inspired by the beat poets and the beatnik writers in the States. And I was just curious about if you could enlighten my audience, worldwide audience, if your mind was open, your consciousness was open by any beat writers in France, if so, who they were and what they were writing about.
Not anything in particular. I think I really evolved according to my own experiences more than from books I read. I was reading a lot, and in my youth that's all there was. There was not even, we had a television, not even when I was a teenager. It was a bit later, so books always. I still love reading books, but no, there was not a specific author who made my mind evolve so much. I think it's more thanks to music and the situation I was put because of music and the places I went and the people I met all over the world. Because as soon as I started playing jazz, I was invited to play all over Europe. It was not just in France. And in fact, I connected with British musicians and also German jazz and rock musicians. I worked a lot in Germany and in Italy. So to be exposed to a tradition as well, because in Europe you go to cities in Italy and it's amazing, how much art there has been for centuries that has influenced art around the world. So I think it was good that I had a sense of the tradition of where art came from and how it evolved, as opposed as what you mentioned, the young guys who might not know the roots of things and don't have time to search for it.
They don't have time to search for it. That's right. They don't have time.
It was my nature to explore and not just stick to interpreting tradition, but I always had, it was always with a respect for tradition, because I understood how revolutionary these great artists, whether they were painters or writers or musicians, how revolutionary they were in their times. But it's a chain. At the same time, I don't know any musician in the world or even a genius who started from scratch, has invented everything new. It always starts from based on listening to musicians from who were before us. There is an inspiration somewhere, and they managed to take that further, and that has been the case so far. And I believe, I have faith in mankind. I think there will always be brilliant, very talented, very intelligent, very young artists. But I must say that the environment, that society, as it is evolving with technology, indeed doesn't facilitate to encourage exploration and being bold and adventurous.
I agree.
It's more and more difficult to get to get down to earth, to get a recording contract if you don't fit in a specific category today. So I was so lucky, and often, with Stanley, for instance, when so many times we have said each other how lucky we were to have started our careers in the 60s and 70s, when the rule was really to experiment. That's what was leading the art world was, and people who were around us, radio programmers, record company executives, were all big fans, passionate about music, and following the most adventurous artists. It was, we could be experimental and lead the pack, and it's not that way anymore.
No, it's not.
You're too different. You know what I mean? So that's my concern. But other than that, different times, young people have to adapt. They have to adapt. So much has been created and experimented already. It's true that there's less to explore. I'm talking about arts, being a musician, I'll stick to music and just, but they're fine. I hear very talented young people in young generation who are able to come up with, they assimilate what has been done, what we have done before them, and are able to come up with something very fresh and very, very interesting.
I wanted to read this quote to you from a bass player, Bill Crow. He said, Kenny Clarke was one of the guys who changed the way drummers play because he couldn't play the bass drum that fast. He didn't really have chops. He didn't really have chops to execute things as well. He used a lot of rebound. He wasn't a trained technician. He heard the music in a wonderful, dancey way. He figured out that if he left the 4/4 out of the bass drum and used it for accents and put the time on the ride cymbal, then you could hear the bass player and the piano chords better. He didn't have to work so hard. I'm just curious. Can you talk about who was the drummer that you played with like Kenny Clarke who wasn't putting the bass drum on the 4/4? Like I listened to that My favorite album is with you and Grappelli, the burning violin summits, and I think it's Andres Ceccarelli is on drums.
Yeah.
And I wanted you to me, that's part of it. It's just this formulaic 4/4 rock beat. And these jazzers, I mean, obviously the lineage continued on to from Roy Haynes to Max Roach. They refined it. But can you talk about a couple of unheralded drummers that had unorthodox styles that really helped stretch you out?
Well, one who is famous in France, he's actually from Switzerland originally, but has been in Paris since his youth. His name is Daniel Humer, pronounced in French, Humair. He was the most experimental and very modern, new ideas. But I would say that as soon as I got involved with the modern jazz and going out to jazz club with my violin to play bebop or post-bop, all the drummers then had followed up on Kenny Clarke already, and no one was playing the regular 4/4 on drums, on the bass drum.
I know. It's insane. It was insane.
It was gone.
Yeah, it was gone, man. When can you talk about the first time you had a chance to play with Tony Williams, what that was like?
Wow, yeah. What happened is I was in California, and after playing with George Duke, and I'd heard that Tony Williams had left Miles Davis and formed this new band, Lifetime, and was playing I think at the Jazz Vanguard in New York, and and that he had a young guitarist, new guitarist from England, John McLaughlin. So I'd not heard of John yet, but I knew of Tony Williams. I had seen him in concert with Miles Davis before in France. So I decided to stop in New York and just to go hear Tony Williams trio. And I was, again, blown away by what they were doing musically. This fusion of rock and jazz. And then, so he asked me if I would come the next day to rehearse with them. I talked to McLaughlin after the show and told him how impressed I was, and he asked me if I was a musician. I said, yes, my name, I play violin, and he had heard of me being British, through jazz magazines in Europe.
Sure.
Oh, yeah, so he introduced me to Tony Williams, and Tony asked me to come the next day. But I couldn't stay. I had gigs in France, so that didn't work. But, I mean, that's it. I said, wow, playing with Tony Williams. So a few years later, I arranged that we played together in the jazz festivals in Europe. And, it was the first time, I must say, that I was playing with a drummer who was such a genius, so revolutionary on the instrument. But at the same time, it was grooving,
Right.
And also, he said, "I'm going to bring a young bass player. He's the new cat in New York," and it was Stanley Clarke, who was maybe 20 years old.
Wow.
So, and in fact, it was playing that summer with them that I couldn't wait and come back to the U.S. to meet musicians of that level.
Well, Jean-Luc, we just burned through an hour. I really have a lot more to get to. I hope we can set up a time to do part 2.
Okay. I didn't know I took...
This is not.
I'm still able to talk that long. Good. Yeah. Okay. Sure.
Did you have a good? Did you enjoy yourself? Was it a good time?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you make me revisit my whole life here.
No, but also I want to tell you, give me your email because this interview is going to broadcast worldwide on Saturday, and I want to make sure you get a link so you can get it out to people because anywhere in the world they can hear it.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me your email.
Send it to you can use Ponty at Ponty.com. Just my name twice.
Ponty at Ponty.
Ponty at Ponty.com.
All right, Jean-Luc. We have more to do. I really we're just getting started here, brother. But such an honor to connect with you. Thank you for, as we know, music is unquantifiable.
You're welcome. Yeah. My pleasure. It was I enjoyed speaking with you. Where are you located?
Tucson, Arizona.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, you and Stanley need to come down here at some point because I've done 2 monster. I'll send you a bunch of stuff. You're going to crack up when you hear. So I'll send you the George Duke stuff later today,
great.
Okay?
Very good.
Cheers, brother. Have a great day.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
We'll be right back on The Jake Feinberg Show.